Hey everyone, and welcome to As Seen In, the show where we take a look at firearms and their usage in popular media. I'm John, and I'll be hosting you as we jump into the FN F2000. For those of you new to the channel, we're going to take a look at the F2000, some of its history, how the gun operates, and what it's like to shoot. From there, we'll take a deep dive into its usage in video games and movies and explore why the game developer, the director, prop master, or whoever decided that the F2000 was the gun for the job. Disclaimer, this isn't a deep dive on the gun's history or a super deep dive on it technically. We're going to take a comprehensive look at the gun and then take the deeper dive into the examples of where it's been used in media. It's curious, the F2000 has such a small footprint on the internet, and among the hard copy resources I had at my disposal, I found that funny because I felt like it had such a large representation in film and video games, but even that wasn't true. It's really not been used much by creators in these art forms. The impression the gun has had on me, from my experience consuming media, is hard to miss. So that's sort of the thesis here, trying to understand why this gun has such a big footprint on our consciousness, or just my consciousness, but yet it actually does not have much of a footprint at all. So let's dive in and find out. First off, a brief look in the history of the F2000. As I mentioned, the information out there isn't too deep on the inception of the gun, but I'll share what I managed to find. The F2000 is made by FN, or Fabrique Nationale, a firearms manufacturer in Belgium. FN is a prolific company building and designing firearms for militaries and agencies the world over, including the US. The company really is a rock star when it comes to arms development, and just to name a few of their most iconic products off the top, you have the High Power, the 5.7, the P90, the SCAR, the M240, the M249, aka the SAW, just to name a few. Then of course there's the F2000. Design for the F2000 went on from 1995 to 2001. The goal was to make a modular assault rifle. It's kind of a common thread I'm noticing with these contemporary weapons developments is just that modularity. But anyways, being designed with modularity in mind, the theory was that the gun could have staying power and it would grow as the battlefield and technology advanced. The F2000 was developed with the hopes of being the successor to the FN FNC, but also was aimed at being a rifle to be exported. At the time of its inception, a lot of Bullpup rifles were being fielded by European and English Commonwealth countries, so it could be safe to speculate that FN was hoping to break into that market. In 2001, the F2000 made its debut at the IDEX Defense Exhibition in Abu Dhabi, UAE. Getting right down to the bottom of it, the F2000 was not successful. It was adopted by the Belgian Special Forces and Slovenian Army as two of the most noteworthy instances. Other than that, it's been purchased in smaller quantities for special forces for nations around the world, including India, Libya, Peru, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia. I would say the rifle is a failed rifle in the regard that I'm sure FN had larger hopes for it than to be sparsely used by special forces agencies and adopted by Slovenia, and by the G.I. Joe troop outfit. I'd venture to say in jest, but would say it all the same, that Hollywood and video games adopted the rifle more than anyone else. And even then, it wasn't that much. The F2000 is still in use today, and is the service rifle for Slovenia, but the rifle was removed from FN's international and US website. The civilian versions are not sold anymore, and I'd wager that it's not being produced, at least for the civilian market. Let's jump back to the rifle itself and learn about it some more, and then we'll jump into exploring more about the legacy and exposure of the F2000. So let's take a look at the F2000. In this case, the example I have here today is my FN FS2000 Tactical, the S designating it as the civilian version in semi-auto, and the Tactical denoting it as the version with the Picatinny rail on top. As you can see, the F2000 is a bullpup rifle. For a lot of you, this may look bizarre and different to what you may think of when you hear assault rifle or modern rifle, which many of you probably picture as the standard AR-15 type weapon. So, what's a bullpup rifle? A bullpup is a firearm that has a magazine fed rearward of the fire control group or pistol grip. So you have an AR-15, something you recognize. You see the magazine is forward of the fire control group, and then with the bullpup, you have the opposite of that, where the fire control group is forward of the chamber and magazine. A benefit of the bullpup is that you have a more compact design because the barrel and chamber are recessed back here, where in a regular rifle it starts forward. So automatically this is the biggest benefit of a bullpup. Its compact size and great balance. The ergonomics on bullpups have always felt serviceable, but ultimately failed or lacked in one or two areas. Just too many compromises in the design for ergonomics compared to a AR or similar patterned rifles. I'd argue the Tavor X95 does it right, and well enough, but all bullpups don't check all the boxes in ergonomics, again, as a typical AR-15 styled weapon does. Enough of other guns though. Let's take a look at the F2000 and some of the design quirks that it has, as well as seeing what it does well and doesn't do well. As you can see, the rifle is pretty compact, and the fact that I can hold it here within this frame is a good example of that. If we start at the front end of the rifle from the muzzle, you can see the barrel sticking out just a bit. Within the context of the US civilian market, we can contextualize the first major pro of the bullpup design even more. In the US, a rifle needs to have a barrel longer than 16 inches without being considered an NFA item. With traditional rifles such as an AR-15, that limits you in creating a compact package. But with a bullpup, the barrel starts back here, resulting in that you can have a full-size rifle that meets the 16-inch barrel requirement and remain a compact rifle. Moving further along down the rifle, you can see this huge handguard, which gives it the name of the tactical tuna or combat tuna, as some have called it. Along those lines, I personally think it looks like a boat with the way the handguard is. like a beefy camo on a skiff. But that's just me. You can get the tri-rail Picatinny handguards. That makes this a lot more ergonomic, and that keyword, modular. Here on the left side you have the charging handle. It locks upward in this recess and requires manual manipulation to recharge the weapon, as it does not lock open on the last shot fired. One thing I've learned about the F2000, it has pretty similar manual of arm to an MP5 in terms of the reload, which is interesting because the MP5 is very dated with its reload and manual of arms. It adds curiosity to the fact of the F2000 where you have this futuristic, cool sci-fi gun, but it has some very dated manual of arms. I think that could almost serve as an example of one of the reasons why it failed at large. The reload for this gun is back, off, on, forward. The F2000 shoots 5.56, also 223 Remington. It's the standard NATO round for most rifles. And here's what it looks like, and this specifically is a 5.56 NATO. As I stated, this is the tactical model, so it has the pick rail on top. The original F2000 had the integrated sight with the futuristic hood over it. Moving back to the trigger, we have a pretty typical Bullpup trigger, and that's where one of the major Bullpup cons comes up. Bullpup triggers are typically not great, especially as semi-auto rifles. In simplest terms, it's due to the nature of the trigger itself being forward of the hammer and striker being rearward a ways by the chamber. The trigger pull also has to translate all the way back to the rear of the gun with the trigger bar mechanism. Because of that, you have a long, stagey trigger pull. Honestly, Bullpup triggers don't bother me too much, but it does seem to bother a lot of other people, so I don't know. Here in the trigger guard, you can see a safety. As you can see, it's disc-shaped and rotates as you manipulate it. As for safe and one for fire, if this was a machine gun, it would have selectors for full auto fire. Back here you can see where the magazine feeds into the rifle. Obviously, as stated, this is one of the areas of a defining feature of a Bullpup with its location. Inside the magwell, there are rubber wipes that create a seal, further reinforcing the closed system design. Because of this, the F2000 only takes stand-out mags, and because it's a tight fit to get that seal, the mags do not drop free. To get a mag out, you lift your hand into it and beer can and rip the mag out. Now, one thing that is really cool about the F2000 is that it aims to be a closed system, as I've mentioned, so that it can keep out debris and dust and sand so that the gun doesn't have anything to mess with the operation. And so because of that, you don't see any ejection port here on the right side, or even on the left side, which is a great thing because it allows true ambidextrous use of the rifle. This is significant because firing a Bullpup lefty has its shortcomings and that brass is ejecting right into your face. Having fired a Tavor and an AUG lefty, I can attest that it's not pleasant. It's certainly doable, but just for being a person shooting and enjoying the rifle at the range, you don't want to have that flying in your face. The F2000 completely mitigates this issue with its design, accomplishing two things: keeping it a closed system and making it truly ambidextrous. You'll see there's no ejection port on either side, or apparent access to the chamber even. The question is, where's the ejection port? Well, it's here, at the front and right side of the rifle. There's a chute system that spent cases are fed into simultaneously as the chamber is fed with a fresh cartridge. As the casings build up, they kind of just follow the chute from the front as it builds up. It's a really cool design, and it's been reliable, and it definitely has done the job well, at least in my experience. Lastly, because you don't have traditional access to the chamber, use this little flap here to get access to it. I won't take the gun down, but here you can get a glimpse of all the plastic components in it. Most components of the F2000 are polymer besides things like the barrel and other important reinforced areas. Because of the materials used, the rifle is pretty light. The lightweight nature of the rifle combined with its balance of being a Bullpup make it really maneuverable and comfortable to shoot and operate. When it comes to firing the rifle, it's a pleasant firearm to shoot. That should come as no surprise, and I should clear up that while this rifle can be considered a failure, that's not because it's not a well-built rifle. It's FN. It just didn't succeed because it wasn't there design-wise, and Bullpups, I guess, turned out a trend. With that said, what we have here is a really well-made rifle. I really enjoy taking the F2000 out to the range, and despite its antiquated reload cycle, I enjoy drilling and running around with it. It's simply fun to play with and mess around with at the range, and honestly, I feel like Master Chief when I use it. I mean, at the bottom line, that's enough of a reason to enjoy it, just shooting it right there. I really am fond of the F2000 for the simplest reason that it's super cool, and it makes you feel like a character from a game or movie while messing around with it, and I mean, hey, what's better than that? So that's the gun itself and how it is to shoot. Now let's get into the meat and potatoes of the show and talk about its usage in popular media and explain why it's been used in film and video games and why it failed to be adopted by anyone en masse. We'll aim to come to this answer by exploring its usage in popular media compared to its adoption. Like I touched on earlier, the rifle usage wasn't that vast in popular media, but before doing my research I felt like I had seen it everywhere on screen and in games, which obviously isn't the case after my research. But the funny thing is, even after my research, I still feel like it's used everywhere. I think that's something to explore. The rifle makes its impression on you, or at least it did with me, and the question is why, and how did that come to be? But you've seen the F2000 in the OG Splinter Cell game, which was the first usage of popular media, I'll add, Innocent Venus, Battlefield Bad Company 1 and 2, which is where my fascination of the rifle started, Warface, Lockout, Terminator Salvation, Splinter Cell Double Agent, where we see a funky collapsible stock, which isn't accurate or real, Iron Man 2,
This is the FN2000 from Belgium. They do make something better than waffles. It's beautiful, but I can tell this isn't disco enough for you, so I'm gonna put it right here.
Ghost Recon Wildlands and Breakpoint, Gamer, Stalker, Shadow of Chernobyl, Rainbow Six Siege, Sam Fisher is back with his trusty Belgian rifle, Medal of Honor, The Mechanic, Battlefield 3, Sword Art Online 2, Hitman Blood Money, G.I. Joe, The Rise of Cobra, The Expendables, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, and most importantly, Halo. Yes, we're counting that, and I'll explain why. While obviously the MA5B is not an FN2000, the similarities in the timing of Halo Combat Evolved is extremely important and convenient in the story of the F2000, and its exposure in the media. As I mentioned earlier, the F2000 debuted in March 2001 at IDEX. Halo Combat Evolved launched November 2001. Halo was in development long before March 2001, and it's safe to assume the developers had their main weapon of the game ironed out at that time. So what we have here is a total and utter coincidence that is just stranger than fiction. To the average person on the street, the F2000 and MA5B look alike. You have the chunky handguard, the bulky top section of the rifle, and then obviously the fact that they're both bullpups. What gets weirder is that the manual of arms for both the F2000 and the MA5B are the exact same when it comes to reloading. Back, off, on, forward. Back, off, on, forward. I think this convenient timing with Halo, one of the biggest games in the world at the time, which continued to be so for the next 10 years, basically coincidentally championed the rifle that exists in real life and debuted only months earlier of the game's release. I think this is one of the major factors why the F2000 feels like it has such a prolific footprint when it's just average at best. Understanding this and exploring this is important to then understand how and why the rifle is used in popular media. The F2000 is a futuristic looking gun, there's no doubt about that, and the fact that it looks like one of the most famous fictional firearms of all time certainly hammered that home. When not used in military context, the F2000 is likely used as a prop for a future setting, and Halo helped establish that. Almost a year later to the day, Splinter Cell came out. I noted earlier that this was the first official usage of the F2000 in media. In Splinter Cell, it's the main rifle of Sam Fisher, a deadly covert agent specializing in stealth. The rifle is known as the SC-20K in-game. Typically, the rifle is configured with a suppressor, too, for the Hollywood quiet stealth action. With long development cycles in gaming and in film production, it makes sense it took for almost a year and a half for the F2000 to first appear. I don't know for certain, but I would say that there may have been collaborative effort between FN and Ubisoft to get the gun in the game. The 5.7 is Sam's sidearm, so there's more FN firearms right there. So it could be likely that there was some collaboration here between Ubisoft and FN. For two reasons, I could see FN wanting the gun in the game, and if they had nothing to do with it, well, at the least, the game developers of Ubisoft did exactly what FN would have wanted them to do. One of the things is the feature set and how it's used in tandem with other gear. Postures the F2000 as a utilitarian, modular, and sophisticated weapon system. It simply has the notion of being top-of-the-line tech, just being parallel to all the other super state-of-the-art gear Sam Fisher uses in-game. And it doesn't hurt that the gun itself looks top of the line with its unconventional look. And in regard to its modularity, the F2000 in-game has a bunch of functions with a launcher allowing you to shoot darts, gas grenades, and even sticky cameras. It's as if Ubisoft is showcasing this gun and its capability throughout the game. It's pretty wild that Halo and Splinter Cell came out to the critical success that they did, all within a year of the debut of the F2000. I think that is really, period point blank, a reason why it remains so prevalent in the zeitgeist of weapons used in media. There's one more reason, and it's pretty damn simple, but before I jump into that, I wanted to jump in why the gun solidified as something I really liked. And that was in 2008 with Battlefield Bad Company. Battlefield Bad Company was an offshoot of the Battlefield game series from DICE and EA. It was made to cater to the console audience and give them an online Battlefield experience. The game set its tone as just a tad quirky, and I think that's why the F2000 fit right in and had the exposure it had within the game and its campaign. Because let's be honest, the F2000 is more than a little bit quirky, and definitely so to the layman. I was drawn to it myself simply because I thought it looked cool and because of its ease of use in game. This is game plan of mine actually all the way back from 2008. The multiplayer was fun, but the netcode or whatever it was at the time was terrible, resulting in a laggy experience more often than not. So the F2000 was actually perfect to just unload a mag and secure a killing game, mitigating the low latency. The game also focused on destructibility, and they needed all their assault rifles in the game to possess a grenade launcher to play in that sandbox, which, as you know, modularity and all, the F2000 delivered on. I was also drawn to the F2000 because it reminded me of the MA5B from Halo. I spent many summer days and winter evenings playing the snot out of this game, and the usage of the F2000 endeared me to it because it was so much fun to use, but it was also just similar to an iconic gun I loved from my favorite game, Halo. And so while I bring up Battlefield Bad Company as like a personal anecdote of the F2000 and my experience with it, I think it also exemplifies the way the gun is used in video games pretty much across the board, besides Splinter Cell. And it largely fits the role as, high firing rate assault rifle, which in terms of gameplay, it usually just functions as an SMG that runs out of ammo quick. Most games do keep true the clunky reload of the F2000, so it always comes across as a pretty subpar gun that uses its ammo way too quickly. It's inaccurate at range. And yeah, it's just, in my research of going through all the videos of the gun being used in video games, no one really likes it. It's funny because my liking for it comes from working around that through bad game latency with Battlefield Bad Company, and that's how I was endeared to it. So that's kind of funny. It really is interesting how much of a cult following this gun must have, because largely most people who cover the gun in video commentary on things out there from video games, they love to talk about its shortcomings, and I can totally see that, and I've experienced that with video games. And I think we can bring this back to Halo, Halo being the first huge example of this Bullpup rifle being used in a video game. And if you know Halo, you know that the assault rifle in that, the MA5B, is essentially an SMG. It's not a rifle. At 100 meters, just can't hit anything. It's just very inaccurate. And in full auto, you can't hit a broadside of a barn with it. It's just interesting. And I think that might have resonated through to other games. And also it does come down to game design, where certain rifles are kind of flexed to certain roles. And so the F2000 has been kind of subjugated to this high rate of fire, medium, close range assault rifle. You can't really blame the gun so much, because there is some truth in the design and the gameplay decisions, but it's also counterbalanced with game designers just making it fill a niche. The gun is accurate. You can definitely stretch it out and get hits with it. It's a great gun, and it's got an FN barrel. But yeah, just thought that was interesting. But back to the second part of my thesis and why the gun is used and why it's perceived to have a much bigger Hollywood and video game footprint than it does. Instead of isolating one major usage in media to hammer home this point, we're going to explore the concept of shorthand in storytelling and visual storytelling. Those examples to be discussed here are the Tom Clancy games, then G.I. Joe, The Rise of Cobra, and Gamer. First, let's start by defining what I mean by shorthand. Props serve many purposes in film, but one of the most common and effective means they are used are to quickly communicate something while not having to use expositional dialogue to give context to a situation or characteristics. So that definitely translates to firearms as props in film and as weapons in video games. Most people out there are not firearms enthusiasts, but most people, the laymen in regards to firearms, are the ones consuming this media at a majority. So that's why a rifle that is unfamiliar and futuristic looking can be plugged into a situation and the story can just move on. People will get the picture right away when they see something futuristic, bold, and unfamiliar. Tom Clancy games always sell the premise of a near future of tomorrow. How better to convey that than this futuristic looking gun that is versatile? It also helps that the first usage of the F2000 in media was in a Tom Clancy game, and that did a number to establish the F2000 as a representative state-of-the-art tech. In G.I. Joe, The Rise of Cobra, the protagonists are taken into a fraternity of elite special forces troops from around the world. They have awesome tech, training, and gear. As soldiers, they need weapons, and instead of something conventional, they choose the F2000 as a standard issue rifle of the G.I. Joe unit. Boom. It's that simple. A superiorly trained fighting force with future tech, gear, and toys. Here, take this futuristic looking rifle as your standard issue rifle. All this high-tiered tech in G.I. Joe looks outlandish, but a tad familiar and grounded. And that's what the F2000 is, quite literally. Gamer is a movie where gamers control real convicts in a deathmatch of sorts through some kind of neurological link. In Gamer, the F2000 is the gun that all cannon fodder extras use. Featured extras and main characters have a litany of guns, but all the guns the grunts and people just there to die, they have the F2000. Why? Again, shorthand. Just seeing the F2000 in this context is a simple, hey, it's the near future, that's a basic gun of the near future, that's why everyone's using it. You have the elements coming together to paint a picture. Future tech being used with the fact that people are controlling others in some sort of deathmatch, combined with guns that look futuristic, tells you without anything having to be said that this is in a near future setting. Really revolutionizing stuff here, but really, it's important to grasp this concept of shorthand as it allows you to read a scene and process the story. With films and games, everything is so meticulously put into place, and someone made the conscious choice of whatever it is, so when seeing it on the context of screen, a message is conveyed. I think the F2000 largely exists in media because it's so damn effective at doing that. It's so effective at being the future. I love the F2000, and I'll be honest, I didn't think this would have been a dense episode as it was. I thought, hey, this gun isn't super prolific, but let's run through where it's been used and some cool things about it. But as I researched and wrote out this episode, the story of the F2000 and its perception in media became really interesting. Comparing that with its lackluster adoption and service record posed a really compelling thesis. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope you learned something. As always, if you're new to the world of firearms or film theory, that you have a new interest in either. As the F2000 is likely to become a memory in practical use in the world and a collectible in the civilian market, I think its legacy and usage is going to keep on keeping on screen. The next time you see the F2000 on screen, you'll know why it was chosen. Have a good one. Bye.